Okay, so here we are looking at my 2013 Harley Davidson Switchback. Now I bought this bike back in 2015. It was used. Bought it off a Harley dealer, but it only had 400 miles on it when I bought it. Problem is ever since I've owned this bike, had nothing but electrical problems with it. Failure to start and the dreaded V-enter code. For those of you who don't know what the V-enter code is, it's a Harley Davidson slang word for your shit ain't gonna start. But give you the lowdown on this unit. I got to give the dealer some credit. You know, when I bought the bike, it was out of warranty. They didn't have a warranty with it. Paid cash for it. But when I started having problems, they did step up and help me out to a degree. They went ahead and put in a new battery. Didn't solve the problem. They went ahead and put in a new main wiring harness. Didn't solve the problem. They went in and put in a new stator, and that did solve the problem for a short period of time. And you know, by the time they got doing all that stuff, it was towards the end of the season, and you know, I told them everything was good, told them we was all square, thanked them for their help, and then when I go to get the bike out the following year, I got problems. Well, I don't fault the dealership. The dealership done me right. Yeah, I mean, you know, they just didn't really get it fixed, but on the other hand, they did put a lot of time and they did put some money into a bike that they didn't have to. They could have just said, sorry about your luck, you bought it as is. But they didn't do that to me, and I'm not out to grind them, so I get on the forum and I start asking the guys, you know, what's going on with this and what's going on with that. And come across a couple of suggestions, which we're going to talk about right here now. One of the suggestions that was talked about was go get you one of these cycle electric voltage regulators. And so I did. And lo and behold, it solved my problem for about 2 months straight. I couldn't believe it. I thought, okay, here's the deal. We're done, you know. No more Harley voltage regulators, you know, for me, you know. And I thought everything was going to be good. But took the bike to a car wash, started hosing it down. Sure enough, get the V-enter code again. Get the bike jumped, get it home, get it dried out, and I don't have any more problems with it. None. But I'm always eerie. I'm scared to take it somewhere, thinking that it's going to leave me set. Well, you know, another suggestion the guy on the forum says, well, you should put in a manual start button. And that's what this here is. This is a button, fits on your starter solenoid, and apparently if you have problems you can push it. It will engage the starter. And some guys have had success in installing these and fixing their problem. Still open for debate on what the actual problem is, if it's a moisture problem getting in the wiring, if it's a bad design on the wiring. I've seen videos where guys talk about, yeah, the wiring circuit, you know, coming from your switches on down isn't as good as it used to be or as good as it should be. And I really, you know, seen a lot of videos, talked to a lot of people, and I don't know. I really don't know what the deal is. I know I have continued problems, and quite honestly, I've thought multiple times about just getting rid of the bike, but the problem of it is here's the problem, okay? With my health the way it is, and the time and money I've got in getting this bike set up the way I like it, I can't justify trading it off on something else and starting all over. You know, the bike's paid for. Love the bike when it's running. I just need it to be able to start when I need it to start. So we're going to make a quick video. Actually, I shouldn't say quick. Probably going to be one of my longer ones, of installing this switch into the starter. And another suggestion was take a look at the contacts in the starting solenoid and maybe clean them up. So that's the long history of the bike, and this is where we're at today on this project. And I want to make a video showing how this is done on these switchbacks. You know, maybe just to help out the next guy. So that's where we're at, that's what we're doing. Let's get started. Okay, so if you're going to do the project in as detail or in as much depth as I have done in this video, these are the tools that you're going to need. You're going to need a Phillip head screwdriver. You're going to need a number 12 metric end wrench, a number 11 metric end wrench. You're going to need a 1/4 inch Allen wrench, a 9/32 socket. I just happen to use a 1/4 inch drive long, but you can use a regular 9/32 wrench if that's what you have. And you're going to need a T40 torque bit. My torques happen to be 3/8 drive. Use whatever you got. You don't have to use the ratchets here, just whatever you got. Okay, so here we are, continuing on with the project. As you can see, I removed the seat, I removed the battery, and I removed the battery box. And the reason why I've done that is one of the other things that was suggestion on the forum, people have had problems with this negative ground cable where it mounts to the motor. This end has been known not to be attached firmly, and given a weak ground, it has caused many problems with some Harley owners. I've checked this in the past, I've ruled this out in the past, but seeing how I'm taking the starter motor out, I'm going to revisit these areas. I'm going to revisit the negative cable. I'm going to revisit the positive cable. Just make sure everything's up to snuff. So, you know, when you go and do all that, you've got to pull the battery and the battery box out. Also up in here on the frame, as you can see, are 2 ground studs. Those have been cleaned up in the past. I know they're not my problem now, but we'll be re-cleaning them up again and doing it while we're here. The battery box, to pull the battery box, you've got 2 screws on the top. You've got 1 screw in the center, right there. These are T40, they're Torx, number 40. and they just come right out. So that's where we are right now. Pulled the seat, pulled the battery box, and I'm in the process. I'm going to take off the cables and pull the starter, and we'll get back with you after that. Okay, so I disconnected the wiring, and that there's the ground stud on the motor. That's an 11 millimeter bolt, and that is tied in with the negative battery cable. And in addition to that, there's another little wire, probably 10 gauge wire, that goes up to the rear ground stud for the frame, and that's how it gets the ground from the frame. That is also 11 millimeter. The main battery cable going to the starter solenoid, I removed that. That is a 12 millimeter nut. Right here towards the front end of the starting solenoid is a clip that comes off of the main wire and harness. It's that little white clip there. Clips into that spot there, the front of the starting solenoid. I'm not 100% sure what this here is. I expect it's some kind of a temperature gauge or something. But it also has two wires, 90-degree rubber elbows. One wire's white, one's black. It also tied into the main harness. Just disconnected these connections and pulled the main harness out of the way. Okay, continuing right along, as you can see, I've pulled out the starter, and the only bolts that hold it on are the two bolts at the top. They are a 1/4 inch Allen bolts. So you need a 1/4 inch Allen wrench, and you pull them two bolts out, and then the unit will pull straight on out. You'll have to wiggle it a little to get it to come, because there's a gasket in here, an O-ring, and it gets it's a snug fit. But what I wanted to warn you guys of are these little bushings. There's one in each hole. And when I originally pulled the starter out, this one over here dropped and fell down, and it got wedged in between this sprocket and the frame. And had I not heard it dropped, and had I not went looking for it, I don't know what kind of damage it would have caused when I go to put everything back together. So be aware that there are two little bushings in the holes for the starter. Now I got the starter on the bench, and we'll see what happens from there. Okay, so here we are. We've got the starter on the bench, and we have pulled the cover off of the starter solenoid. 3 bolts, nothing major, 9/32, and you pull that right out. This here is the plunger, which pushes the starting gear onto the flywheel. This also just pulls straight out. Got a spring on it. And as you can see, looks a little burnt. These here are the contacts on the inside that it would pick up its electricity from. And they're a little bit burnt, and I got a little bit of uneven wear on this side over here. So we'll have to clean those up. One thing that I did want to show you guys though, this cable here is the positive cable that comes from the starting solenoid down to the starting motor. And when I pulled this cap off, as you can see, there's some white powder there. I'm sure Harley doesn't put baby powder on their starter motor, so we will pull this nut off and clean this terminal up. And then I will clean the contacts on the inside and the contact on the plunger, that big copper ring, before we install the actual starter switch. Give you another look. Well, that's what mine looks like, 4,000 miles, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so here we are. I've cleaned up these contacts, and all I used was just a piece of 120 grit sandpaper. Actually, here's the piece I used. I found that the smaller the piece, the easier it is to get it in there and touch up those contacts. Another thing I'll tell you, this hole here, I took a piece of paper towel and crammed it in that hole. And the reason why I did that is because, you know, as you're sanding this stuff here, you're going to get some grit inside of here, and I just wanted to keep as much of that out going down into that bore, which is where this thing here slides in and out of. And also took and cleaned up that copper ring there, which as this goes in makes contact with those two and then makes the connection across from your battery coming in, hits this contact, goes through that copper ring on that other piece, makes the contact here, and then power goes down into the starter itself. I also took and cleaned up that powdery stuff. Let's see if I can't get this down. That was just a wire brush deal. That's also a 12 millimeter. Just take that off, wire brushed it, put it back together. No big deal. Everything is extremely straightforward at this point. So now what I'm going to do is, you know, I'll pull that paper towel out, I'll blow all this out, and then I will put the plunger and the spring back in there and then install the new switch on top of it. Okay, so here we are. We've got the unit put back together. Put the spring on the plunger, put the plunger back in after I blew everything out. A couple things I want to talk about. My unit has this wrinkle paint on it. And when you get these switches, they don't come with the gasket. You got to use the gasket from your original cover. Well, what happens is, you know, you got to peel your gasket out. It's a rubber gasket, but it's kind of crusted on here from this wrinkle paint. So takes a little patience to get the rubber off. And then once you get it off, you know, some of the wrinkle paint sticks with the cover and some of it sticks with the gasket. So you have to clean the gasket off nice and good before you reuse it on your new unit. But once you get the gasket, make sure the gasket's clean. You know, installation straightforward. You know, just put on your manual starting button. I used the 3 original bolts. And as you can see, what's going to happen now is if you have problems starting, you're going to push this button and it's going to engage the contacts in here. It's going to send power through the contacts. It's going to manually force the starting gear out and engage it into the flywheel. So yeah, I could see where this might work in some situations. Hopefully it'll be a good fix for my condition for the times where I need it. I did not take apart the starter at all. All the work I'd done was on the tail end of the starting solenoid. I'm not going to make the video of putting everything back together. Installation is just the reverse of taking it out. So if you guys are mechanically inclined to get to this point, you're going to be more than mechanically inclined enough to put everything back together. I will, before I do that, go through and re-look at these cables. This here is the negative cable. This here is the junction that goes to the motor. This here is the wire that goes up to the frame that I talked about earlier. Everything looks good. It's the factory Harley crimp. I got the same thing going on the positive cable. Everything looks good. I don't have any reason to believe that the cables are the issue. I'll give them a quick continuity test and then throw them back on. But this is where we're at. Oh yeah, another thing, when I put my unit back together, there was no lube in here. There was a light coat of oil on the spring that pushes this plunger back out. When I put everything back together, I blew it all out. I wiped everything down. I put everything back together dry. I didn't think what little lubrication was on that spring was actually doing anything. I did not want it to find its way. I didn't want to over lubricate it, have it find its way back to the contacts and maybe cause some burning or some bad issues back there. So I put everything together dry. I did notice on this flange here they had some white lithium grease. I'm suspecting that the factory put that on to aid in the installation of the starter into the primary. And I may put some more grease on this flange just to help to get the starter back in there and seated back up. But other than that, it's going back together like that. And give you guys a video when everything is done. Okay, so here we are at the completion of the project. But there was a couple of things that I noticed putting this back together I wanted to point out to you guys. First off, this ground strap. This is the ground strap that has two wires that come into one connection and then ground to the frame. The main wire goes directly to the battery, and a little wire goes back up in here to a ground stud on the frame. Now what I've noticed is what I've done in the past is I have taped up both of those wires. And while I'm looking at this situation, I'm thinking that maybe that's not a good thing to do, because with the water coming off of the rear tire would theoretically get on those wires and then leak down into the connection, and then I don't know if it would ever get back out or not. This time around when I buttoned it up, I just put less tape on. I didn't tape it up as far. So hopefully that if water does get in, it'll find its way back out. But that's something to consider when you're putting this back together. Maybe you guys would want to leave that all open, so if water does get in that connection, it'll dry out. Another thing I wanted to point out was this plug. This plug goes onto the starting solenoid. It's a small wire. It's red with a black stripe. And when I was looking at the end of this wire, it started to look a little white in color. Very similar to the positive post that goes from the starting solenoid down to the battery that I pointed out. Now, it wasn't chalky like the positive post, but it was a whitish color. And so I took that apart. I took that wire out of that holder and I cleaned it up with the wire brush. It is highly possible, I don't have a wiring diagram with me, but I would surmise that this is the power wire that initiates the starter coming out when you start your starting cycle. So, you know, if you've got a bad connection in there, or if you've got a corrosion, like I think might be part of my problem, that might be part of the issue if you have a similar condition. So I just wanted to point out the grounding strap to the motor, possible issue there with water getting in it, and possible corrosion on this plug that plugs into the starting solenoid. Okay, so now that I've pointed those things out, let's take a look at what we got going on here. In order for this system to work, this manual starting switch, you have to have your on-off switch in the run position. So first, make sure you're in the run position. Turn your ignition on. Confirm that you're in neutral. And as of right now, battery's a little low. It's at 12.1 volts. Then you would simply come down here, put your finger on the go switch, and push it in and see if it goes. Then you would simply shut it off with your off switch. Turn your ignition off, and you should be in business. As much as you normally can be, I guess. So that's the conclusion of the video. Hope this helps somebody out. And if you guys got any comments, feel free to leave comments. If you got questions, I hardly ever answer any questions on my videos, but I will answer them on the forum if you guys make it to the Switchback forum. We'll see you guys later. Many thanks to everybody who's helped me out, and hopefully this is the end of my dilemma. Goodbye.